everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. African Americans and Native Americans are historically connected. Both groups experienced slavery. Both have had their native culture denied, and both have felt the effects of racism. With such shared history, one might think these two races would have no problem coming together. But racial purity is the great divide between blacks and Indians. Coming up next on this Another View history lesson, we talk with author Arica Coleman about her new book, That the Blood Stay Pure, along with Vincent Schilling, host of the Native Trailblazers Radio Show. But first, it's Pet Pledge Friday, the last day of the Radio 1 Drive, and your opportunity to show your love to Another View and WHRV-FM.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Throughout history, African Americans and Native Americans have shared similar experiences. For example, both groups were captured and put into slavery. Both groups were given names and categorized by people who did not understand their language or their culture. And both groups have had to fight to prove their worth in a country where the term the land of the free didn't always apply to them. So it's no surprise that these two races often intermarried, but what you may not know is the history of the conflicts, divisions, and legal battles that surrounded those who did. Joining us to discuss the history of these two cultures is Dr. Arica Coleman, Assistant Professor of Black American Studies at the University of Delaware and author of That the Blood Stay Pure. Arica is both Native and African American. Hi, Arica. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and joining me here in the studio is Vincent Schilling, Executive Vice President of Schilling Media Incorporated, and Vince hosts the Native Trailblazers Radio Show and is a member of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. How are you?
Correct. Hey, I'm doing great, Barbara. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. So I am so fascinated by this topic because I had no idea, Vincent.
There's a lot,
Arica, that there was this divide, but you know. When the whole idea of the drop of blood, we know what that was like in terms of African American and white people, because one drop of blood signified that you were black, you were not white. Is that the same in the between Native Americans and African Americans? Vincent, I'll start with you.
Ah, boy, what a loaded question. Gotta love the show. Well, you know, It can be, and definitely blood is an issue in Indian country, and especially when, you know, I can open up my wallet right now, and I was showing you and Lisa Godley, the producer, earlier, my, you know, St. Regis Mohawk tribal card. You know, I am Akwesasne Mohawk, and I have a card. How many races have a card to say what race they are?
Wow.
I do. And this race is determined by many tribes, and not all tribes, but many tribes, determined by the level of blood quantum that you have, the percentage of blood that you have as Native American. And
that varies from tribe to tribe.
It does vary. It can be anywhere from a 32nd to a 16th to a quarter to a half. Some don't base it on the percentage of blood. Some base it on if you have lineage to the tribe, no matter how distant it may be. So, yes,
Arica,
blood is an issue.
So, Arica, and the part of your premise of your book is this whole idea of how much blood and blood versus lineage. But you, as an African American, you identify yourself as African American and Native American. So, do you have a card too?
No. No, indeed.
And by the way, I have to say real quick that
no.
Eric and I are friends, and the fact that we're both on the same show, we're in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, I don't have a card. I am of Rappahannock Indian descent, but the state-recognized Rappahannocks will never. I mean, if I gave them my documentation and showed them that I was descended from them, they would not accept me because of my African-American ancestry. And, you know, let's talk about this issue of the rhetoric, what we call the rhetoric of blood.
Okay.
Because when you talk about this issue of, 1/4, 1/2, 1/16, all of this is speculation. race is not biological; it's political. And
So
you know,
explain.
you
What
asked
do you
the
mean?
question about are there you know different do different tribes have different criteria? Of course they do. And
So that's what
what's
you mean by
interesting
political
is that
versus.
when you talk about the card.
Mhm.
When you talk about the card, no one has ever asked me what is my certified degree of African blood. They assume my African ancestry because of my hair texture, my skin color, how my nose looks, how my lips look. But when it comes to Native American people, it's the opposite. There's this, you have to prove how much so-called blood that you have. And, you know, in the book, I quote Karen Blue, who says, it may take one drop of blood to make a black person a Negro, but it takes a whole lot of blood to make a Native American an Indian. And that's the politics that we play surrounding this whole issue of blood and, you know, how you determine identity based on what they call blood quantum when it comes to being Native American.
Arica, this issue, though, in some circles, is so contentious that families have been split apart. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. You have the example in Charles City County, Virginia, where in 1901, when the Chickahominy Indians decided to reorganize the tribe, they split from what was then the Cedar Grove Baptist Church, and they started the Samaria Indian Baptist Church. And many of those families split. As Mr. Richard Bowman said, he said, I lost over half my family that day. So some people began, for, you know, different reasons, to identify as Indians. Others remained black. And, you know, he talks about how his grandmother, the brother actually, Henry Eldridge Atkins, came to his grandmother, Nancy Wyatt Atkins, and said, you know, wanted to recruit her for the tribe. And she said, no, brother. Mama born us into this world colored. I'm going to die colored.
Wow.
And so even today you have this contention within that community of who is black and who is Indian. And the Indian tribe, the Chickahominy, will say that they have no African-American ancestry. And then you have those in the African-American community who will also deny Native American ancestry and see those Indians over there. They're not real Indians. They're just, you know, light-skinned blacks trying to, you know, play.
Wow. As a matter of fact, we Lisa Godley did an interview with Mr. Bowman, and I believe we have a clip from him. Let's play that.
Oh, wonderful.
I remember my grandmother telling me that my uncle, who was born in December 1852, his name was Henry Eldridge Atkins, came down to see her and my grandfather to encourage them to join in with them. I remember her saying that she said to her brother, said, no, brother, Mama born us in the world colored, and said, when I go out here, I'm going out here colored.
Now, Mr. Bowman is alive. I mean, we just recorded that this morning.
Lovely.
And they are still, you can feel the pain in his comment.
I got tears in my eyes from that, actually. You know, and this whole issue of Native American, African American, you're not a brother, you're not a sister, you're not part of the family, you're not part of the tribe. Boy, I didn't expect to go here, but, you know, it's something that I feel in my heart isn't right. And I think that what's happened is African Americans and boy, I didn't expect to go here. What I'm feeling right now.
That's okay, yeah.
But African Americans and Native Americans have been attacked for so long, and we've been attacked by every fiber of what we are and every fiber of what we strive to be. Our families were told we're not families. Our brothers are told they're not brothers. Our sisters are told we're not our sisters. Our mothers and everything else, we were taken from each other, pulled apart from each other forced into slavery, taken from here. So what's happened is we are trying so hard to hold on to what we used to have so strongly that we're not willing to let anybody else in. But that's not how it is. Native Americans and African Americans, I always joke and I always say, back in the day, we went to the same parties. Stop fighting.
Yeah.
We can all love each other. And I know that sometimes things just tick us off and we get so angry, but now's the time to stop.
Arica, I asked Vincent this question before the show, and I want to get your reaction because I wonder if this were an issue between, is it because it's African American blood and Indian blood? Would it be an issue, do you think, if it were Indian blood and, I don't know, Irish blood, or Indian blood and some other race other than African American?
Because again, we're dealing with two myths here. The one myth is this myth of the one-drop rule. Mm-hmm. It is the myth that somehow who and what you are is in your blood. Mm-hmm. That's a myth. Blood is not biology. I mean, race is not biology. And as Stuart Hall would say, when you think about race, think less about biology and more about politics.
Okay.
The Human Genome Project showed us that we are 99.99999% the same. And whatever genetic differences that we have, those differences are largely seen within groups, not among groups. So this whole idea of Indian blood and black blood, promotes the idea of blood as race, and also as, this idea of black contamination. So this is where the one-drop rule comes in, wherein one drop of black blood makes you black through and through, but it also signifies a contamination. And this is why you had this effort in the state of Virginia to separate from the African-American heritage if you were Native American because of these two going myths. People did not want to be subjected to Jim Crow, and they did not want to be seen as racially unpure. And so the tenets of racial purity dictated, because what racial purity meant and still means for the large part within the white community and what was later adopted by the Native American community was the absence of blackness. And this is what was being promoted by the racial purists of the day, who began to steal Native American land. Okay, what they would do is they would, because of the historic relationships between African Americans and Native Americans, then they would say, okay, you're no longer Indian, you're black. And because you're black, or what they would say, free Negro, then we're going to take your reservation land. So you had the Gangaskin in 1820. Their land was taken on that basis. They attempted also to take the Pamunkey and Mattaponi reservations, which are in King William County, on that same basis. This happened in Virginia. This happened all over the country, using that myth of the one-drop rule to rob Native peoples of their lands, and then also to justify the second-class citizenship of people of African descent.
Crazy.
Okay, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What are you Native American? And has this been an issue within your family structure, within your tribe? 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. And I throw that question out. Also, if you are African American and you have Native American blood, has there been a discussion within your family about the two races? We would love to hear from you. I want to talk a little bit about Charles City County. And Arica, I'd love for you to give us, kind of the condensed version of the history there. But this is a kind of in a microcosm an explanation of what this whole division of family, meaning, some deciding they're Native American, others deciding they're African American, and they could be brothers and sisters in the same family, and that kind of a split. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The interesting thing about Charles City County is that, the first of all is that the city is a misnomer. Okay, this is a very rural area, which has very little development.
And it's right above Williamsburg.
History. I'm sorry.
I said it's right above Williamsburg.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It has a very rich history of African American, Native American, and Euro American history, and that blended culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, during the 400th anniversary, they had this theme of 3 races, and in other words, of these 3 races and being one, somehow being one out of these 3 races. Mm-hmm. And but the interesting thing is that in Charles City, when it comes to racial identity, it doesn't matter how you identify, particularly when it comes to family ties, because somehow, some way, these folks are all related. These are families, for the most part, which have been in Charles City County since before the American Revolution. And so then, you have this agitation of racial identity, particularly, when it came in the early days of colonialism with the English and the Paspahegh or the Winoke or the Chickahominy tribes who were, being colonized and were being pushed off of their lands.
Mm-hmm.
And so up until about 1750, now the last of the folks who were the most resilient were the Chickahominy. And so they left Charles City and they went to King and Queen County for a bit. Then they ended up back in King William County with the Pamunkey and the Mattaponi. And then, say about 1850, they went back into Charles City. And this is where, the contention lies, because there are people who are saying that the people who were in Central Ridge, these people were Indian people and that they had formed a separate Indian community. But, the African American community says, no, we were all one, and there was no, everyone was known, was identified as colored. And this is another point of confusion, what Ralph Ellison calls the Indian Negro confusion, because terms like Negro, free person of color, mulatto, those terms were used so broadly. And if you look at runaway slave notices, you will see people identified as Negro, identified as mulatto, but in description they are described as Indian.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So these terms were used very broadly. So then really, if you weren't white, you were colored.
Right.
And so, according to the African American community, there was no separate Indian community in Charles City until 1998, when the anthropologist James Mooney came to, actually a little before then, maybe about a decade before then, when the census folks came and said, some of these people don't look black, they look Indian. And then James Mooney came down and he did a census, an Indian census, around 1898, and, there were at least about 200 members of that community who identified as Indian, or who were set apart as Indian by James Mooney. And so then, but they say that before then, there was no separate Indian identity. These folks lived together, they married together, they worshiped together, they, intermarried together. But then when, the outsiders came in and began to separate them out, and you had, those of the same family, yet they're being put in the Indian category, and others are being put into the black category, then this is where the contention, began. And then in 1901, when they decided to separate out and start the Samaria Indian Baptist Church, this is where, the split really began. And what, Mr. Richard Bowman talks about with, it split families, it split communities. So, even today, there is still that animosity with the African American community and the Chickahominy Indian tribe community over this issue of race, identity, family, kinship.
The 400th anniversary of Jamestown, that slogan that you were talking about, four centuries, three cultures, two rivers, and one county.
Yes,
so
thank you.
See, that's okay. I was like, oh yeah, I read that. Let me find that for her.
Right.
We've got some phone calls waiting for us. Let's talk to Mac in Newport News. Hi, Mac, you're in the air.
Yes. I just wanted to kind of fast forward a little bit and think about the modern situation and how it's played out. I do a lot of contracting with the federal government, and also I've noticed that there's been a lot of a feeble attempts at reparations, for the past, and some of them affirmative action, certain kinds of contracting vehicle advantages, gambling casinos that have actually turned things around financially for entire tribes. What has this turnabout, which has created these potential, privileges, has that had effect on the relationship between the African American and Native American cultures? Because there might be spoils to divide.
Okay, let's have our guest answer, and I'll start with you, Vincent. Thanks, Mac, for the call.
Yeah, thanks, Mac. Many of the tribes right now are going through the Thomasina Jordan Act to try and get through a process of law to get given their federal recognition, because none of the 11 tribes here in Virginia have federal recognition. So because they're not federally recognized, they are not privy to those federal-oriented budgets or allocations of funds to tribes. And that, and I'm speculating here when I say this, but I would imagine that anything that may call into question if you are actually a tribe or have 100% tribal membership, if someone is African American, that's trying to get membership, it could muddy the process, so to speak, in some ways. So the fact that some tribes are trying to get federal recognized, and have not yet, is a big issue of contention. So there is no federal monies coming to tribes. This is all state-based. And the biggest problem that they had is because many of the tribes signed with the British, their treaties, And I want to say thank you, Mac, about the feeble the word feeble attempts to make reparations. Yes.
Arica, do you want to respond also?
Yeah, I think that one of the issues is with this whole with these what people are calling preferences or set-asides. First of all, understand that because we live in a society where race matters, and and where whiteness matters. And that's not a conversation that we usually have, because whiteness is to stay invisible, okay? But there is white privilege in this country. And so the affirmative action and these other, kinds of, federal interventions were served as a corrective, because people were being, given jobs simply on the basis of race. Okay. But the problem is, how it's meted out. And what you find is that you get one little slice of the pie that has to be divided among these various groups. And so it doesn't really alleviate the tensions. It actually exacerbates it more.
Okay. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the racial relationship between Native Americans and African Americans with Arica Coleman, author of That the Blood Stay Pure, and Vincent Schilling, host of the Native Trailblazers Radio Show. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment, but first, we're going to check in with Pledge Central and see whether or not we have reached that $1,000 match or not. How we doing, Sandra and Dan?
Well, we're waiting for an update right now to find out exactly whether or not we've met the match or not. But we have gotten a couple of calls about we have gotten a couple of pledges. One, in fact, directly with a message
for that call.
Yes. This is from Bill Cole, Barbara. He says, I waited all week to make my pledge because I think the Another View program is a really valuable asset to the community.
Oh, how wonderful.
So, Bill
Thank
Cole
you.
from
Thank you, Bill.
Yorktown.
Thank you, Bill. We really appreciate that very, very much.
And we have a new member, Gregory Mitchell from Norfolk, who also called on behalf of Another View, and his dog, Sadie. A new member and a renewing member right there.
And thank you, Sadie.
889-9476 is how you can renew your membership or perhaps become a new member. 889-9476 is the number, or the website is WHRV.org. 889-9476. We're in the final hours, Dan, of our fall membership drive.
I know, and I have to say, as a listener and as a member and a supporter of WHRV, I love the 1 week pledge drives. I think bringing it down to 1 week is great, but it means that we've got to remind you, the listeners, to get on the phones and give us a call now. We only have 1 week to do this, and if we don't want them to add another week, come on and join me. 889-9476, 1-800-940-7170. And as a listener, this is also your chance. Thank you for that call. This is also a chance.
I'm loving it. The phone's ringing.
I know. Ring it up. This is also a chance for you to vote. You know, this is sort of like the ratings version of it's the American Idol version of WHRV. This is your chance to let people know how important this programming is. And it is. If you were listening in the last half hour, you see the kind of discussion, the kind of discourse you can find here on WHRV. You're not going to find anywhere else. You're not going to find the likes of Barbara Ham anywhere else who's willing to take time to dig into issues and really, discuss, debate.
Well, history isn't always pretty.
Dig into it.
And we're certainly we're hearing that now. But Barbara Ham and Another View are willing to take on that sometimes uncomfortable histories.
And there's no home for that anywhere else on the dial.
889-9476 is where you can actually own a little piece of that, because that's what happens when you become a member of public radio. You're investing in it, and you're actually a little bit part owner of what it is that you're listening to, of what it is that you love. 889-9476 is how you can be a member, how you can support this programming. And as Dan said, this is a great time to do it because, the folks who make these programming decisions here at the station, they pay attention to when the money comes in, quite frankly.
That's not a secret, right?
Well, I don't know, sort of is. I'm sharing something kind of secretive here.
Okay.
That they don't, they do look at when the money comes in.
Absolutely.
So, like we just heard there from Bill Cole, he called in during Another View because he wanted to make sure that the folks who make the program decisions saw that money came in during Another View. 889-9476.
Just like that person that called. And there's another call right now saying, we want you to keep Another View going because there's no other place to find Another View than WHRV and Barbara Ham.
Try it sometime. Don't do it now, but try it sometime.
And if you make a pledge of $110, not only does that get matched by our $1,000 matching grant, but if you go online, you can see Barbara with one of the mugs.
I know. I didn't realize that. Barbara's actually on camera. She's got one of those mugs. If you go to anotherviewradio.org.
Kind of a Vanna White thing there, but it's very good.
Right there, you can see the mug, and you can add that to your mug collection. Folks love the WHRV mugs.
She's mugging with a mug. Can you see that?
Yes.
There you go.
$110,
Absolutely.
and that mug is yours. 889-9476. So you've got the stuff. You're supporting this great programming here, Another View, and you're making match dollar for dollar right now during this hour. 889-9476.
And a few people to thank. We have a current member, Mark Nemergut from Norfolk.
Mark?
Let's see, a major factor is the quality of life in Hampton Roads, WHRO and WHRV and the television station, he says, are a major factor in the quality of life of Hampton Roads. And that's what you start to recognize when you listen. So, Mark, thank you for renewing your member. And Christy Williams is a new member from Providence Forge, wants to honor her husband's service dog in training, Gunner. Christine, thank you for that call. And thank you for that call.
757-889-9476. And, it is Pet Pledge Friday. That's kind of gotten lost in some of this here, but it is Pet Pledge Friday. We're having a good time with the very serious business of raising the necessary funds to keep programming like Another View healthy and thriving and coming every Friday right here on WHRV. That's how you make it happen, by being a member, by renewing that membership. Do it now. We're in the final hours of our fall membership drive, our Radio 1 drive. Great conversation they're having today on Another View, and it is made possible by our members. 889-9476. We've raised $31,122 so far today. Thanks to everyone that's made that happen. We're going to take you back to what you're paying for. Great programming, Another View here on WHRV. But keep the calls coming, folks. 757 889-9476, or point, click, and pledge online at WHRV.org. And thank you. Back to you, Barbara.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who are calling in. Remember, we do have that $1,000 match. So if you want to call in now, your pledge will be doubled. Back to our conversation about Native Americans and African Americans and their relationship and the politics of blood. Mm-hmm. Because that's really what it comes down to. I want to talk to Rachel we're going to talk to Kathy from Norfolk. Hi, Kathy. You're on the air.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and I just wanted to call and comment because you were talking about race and the Native American, African American connection. And I actually worked as an archaeologist with the Monacan Indians up in Charlottesville, Virginia. And you all hadn't mentioned back in the early 20th century, there was a Department of Health head called Plecker.
We're going to get there.
In Virginia.
we just hadn't gotten to Mr. Plecker yet. We're on our way.
For changing birth certificates to say colored instead of Native Americans.
Yep.
And for modern Native Americans, I know because I've worked with tribes before, one of the major difficulties in getting federal recognition is you have to have an established history on the land and an established history of your tribe. And so with the Plecker thing, it's caused a lot of Virginia tribes to have trouble getting federal recognition because they go to apply, and then they get told, well, no, your grandparents were colored.
Yep.
They're not actually Native Americans. And so they have to go through this whole process, everyone in the tribe, of going and protesting this and getting it changed officially through the Virginia Department of Health in order to apply for federal recognition. And I know this has caused a lot of trouble with the Native Americans in Virginia. And I also wanted to just comment in general. I do my work in Brazil, and it's not the one-drop rule there. There's more of a mixture, but it's also very curious because I've talked to people I know in Brazil, and they're still more inclined to claim Native American history versus African American history, even though supposedly there's more acceptance of mixture. If you ask them, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents were not slaves. They were Native American. And it's still sort of like a preference of less racism. So I just wanted to bring that up because I really find this subject fascinating, but not one that's really addressed much.
Thank you, Kathy, so much for that call. We appreciate that. I want to talk about this whole Mr. Plecker thing.
Plecker.
But and Erica, I'm coming to you because I know that is a major part of your discussion. But let me get Vincent's reaction first.
Well, the one thing, and I appreciate that, Kathy saying that, because yes, and his actions have been called pencil genocide against Native people and colored people, because looking back in history, you can see that overnight people were suddenly wait a minute, I'm a different race now, so he went in and he was registrar at the Bureau of Vital Statistics who went in and literally physically changed records from there is no Native, there is no anything other than just colored.
Everybody was colored
or white. So
Erica.
Plecker, oh, what a character. Plecker was, you talk about a racial purity policeman. He was obsessed with this whole idea of racial purity. Now, before the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 was passed, Plecker had no problem signing off on birth certificates and whatnot for people who claimed American Indian ancestry. And he did this before the Racial Integrity Act. He did this a few months after the Racial Integrity Act. But when Asa Soros in 1924, right, not too long after the Racial Integrity Act was passed, challenged A.T. Fields because the clerk would not give her and her fiancé a marriage license for them to marry, saying that she was colored. That debate of did colored mean Indian or did colored mean Negro or, black, a person of African descent, that became the central argument of the trial luckily for Soros, she and her fiance won. And this really set Plecker off because, and this is what really started what they call the war on the Indians.
Yeah, how dare you challenge me?
Because Plecker felt that these Negroid Indians were attempting to infiltrate the white race with this claim of being Indian. And so if you were claiming to be Indian, he said, no, you're actually a Negro trying to enter into the white race by your Indian claim. And so he started an all-out war. Now, the problem with just putting this solely on Plecker's shoulder is that, once again, this whole issue of what is racial purity. And racial purity meant the absence of blackness. So then you had people, various tribes, who were denying having African American ancestry and saying, no, I'm just Indian and white. And so you could marry, as an Indian person, you could marry a white person and that not affect your Indian status. But then if you married a black person, then you would be put out of the tribe. So this was another way that split families and communities. And so with Plecker saying there are no more Indians because they are actually Negro, then you had what is called the anthropological advocates. These were scholars like Frank Speck, Theodore Stern, and more in our modern time, Dr. Helen Roundtree, who have written a history that, supports this narrative that the Indian people of Virginia, particularly those of the Powhatan Confederacy, these folks had nothing to do with African American people. They are only of white Indian ancestry. And so they are really Indian and not black. And so they felt that they could save the Indians by expunging the black blood. So you had two sides of the racial integrity coin.
Wow.
There was Plecker, who was saying, you people are not Indian, you are Negro because of the historic relationship and the kinship ties you have with black people. And then the anthropological advocates, who were the friends of the Indians, were saying, oh no, these people never had anything to do with black people. They never had any kinship ties. Oh, well, if they did, it stopped during the colonial era. And they have, married so much and intermarried with whites so much that they have, purged themselves of the black taint.
Wow. I tell you, this is just so fascinating because there's so many different sides to it. Let's talk to Sherry in Williamsburg. Hi, Sherry.
Hello, Barbara. Thank you for this great topic. You're
welcome.
Commenters, after I actually even called in, I'd like to remind them that of the old saying that history is written by the victors. And it gets modified. The actual beginning that we know of for blood quantum for the Indian nations began with Andy Jackson when he told the Congress that I can get rid of the Indian problem in 3 generations because we'll register everybody, but only one parent. So that means the children are immediately only half-blood. Their children will only register one parent, therefore they're a quarter. And their children is where we end the Indian problem because we won't register Indian anymore under a quarter. So, yeah, it's really political. And more of the nations, well, some of the nations have bought into it, some have not. I happen to be Jalagi, and the Eastern Band buys into it really big, whereas the CNO, my nation, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, doesn't buy so much of that. But it's political. It very much is. And partly it's because, how much do we get if we have more in the nation, band, or tribe? Then, what is that percentage going to be left for me? And it continues all the way up. When my children were born in the 90s, and I first saw the draft of the birth certificates, they told me my children were white, and I said, take it back and make it right. This is a lie. And I wouldn't allow it. But I had to fight for who I am, and that continues to this very day in some places.
Sherry, may I ask you a question? Do you have a card? I want to get to this card issue before the hour's up too. Do you have a card for your tribe?
The cards are a big thing too.
Yeah.
My children have cards. My spouse has a card. I do not have a card because one of my ancestors was forcibly removed west of the Mississippi and therefore was off of what is now the EBC, the Eastern Band Cherokee Territorial Reservation area. Okay? Because of that break, I don't have a card.
So
Interesting.
So
my children do.
Sherry, thank you so much for this call and for joining in the conversation. I want to ask you, Vincent, then, for those who don't understand about the card, what does it do? What does it mean? To be able to say, in other words, what does it mean to have a card?
It means I get to hold up a card and say, "Hi, I'm an Indian." And I, like I've said before too many times, this is the only race we have to show that we are a race.
So Sherry, let me ask you then.
Although it does get me tax exemption in New York.
If Sherry, let me ask you, Sherry, then since you don't have a card and the rest of your family does that cause a divide? Does that cause an issue? Do they think they're more Indian than you are, more Native American than you are?
Oh, now you're starting something.
They would laugh. They would really laugh because they know when my children were born, I told the doctors to shut up because they were going to hear Jalagi first. I told my children, Oseo Dahida, hello and welcome to the world, which means nice. My baby, my little one.
I love it.
I said, you're going to hear Jalagi, or what white people call Cherokee, first. And they know the mythology, they know the history, because I will not let it die. And that's something that we've learned we must do.
Okay. Thank you so very much. A lot of people
don't even know that Cherokee was one of the code talker languages because we kept it alive long enough to do that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for the call. So,
Erica, I can say something.
Go ahead,
Erica. I can speak to that. Because the whole issue about tribal cards, blood quantum, I mean, this whole business of, my grandmother, my great-grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee, I'm quarter Cherokee. It's so interesting because, race is a language. Race is a language. It's how we speak and how we talk. And this whole business of, identifying people with, mathematical fractions. Now, mind you, Thomas Jefferson in 1815 wrote a letter to Francis Gray. And in this letter, he gave this, he outlines this elaborate algebraic formula that talks about how you can, how a mulatto can become a white person. And he says it takes 2 washes to wash out the taint, okay, which means, the Negro, the African. Okay, he said it takes at least 2 washes. Now, what's interesting is that all this business about a card, about blood quantum, all of this is a colonial imposition. These are European, Eurocentric ideas of citizenship, identity, and belonging that has been imposed on Indian peoples. And unfortunately, we have internalized those values to the point that, yes, people do measure a person's Indianness based on if they grew up on a reservation, if they have a tribal card, if their names are on the Dawes rolls out there in Oklahoma. The Eastern Band of Cherokee are not as well accepted as the Oklahoma Band of Cherokee, because, see, the Oklahoma Band of people, they ended up in Oklahoma as a result of the Trail of Tears. So then the consensus was that if you were not a part of that Trail of Tears, then you're not as Cherokee as I am.
So let me ask.
This is the kind of politics as one of the callers said, this is not biology again. This is all somebody's politics that's being infringed to continue white supremacy.
Crazy.
So let me ask you then, Arica, since you are claimed to be both a Native American and African American, how are you accepted in both communities?
Well, that's all. That depends. Now, with the Rappahannocs, I will never be accepted.
Okay.
Okay, because I'm just too black for them. Okay, but I mean, those are the people. If I had a card, if I had a tribal affiliation, those are my folk. Those are my folk. I'm not their folk. Okay.
Okay, got you.
But let's talk about the Nottoway Indian tribe of Virginia. Okay, I'm not Nottoway, but I am very good friends with that tribe. Matter of fact, I talk about the state recognition process for them. They look at things very differently. They don't measure their Indianness based on, who they affiliated with. As Chief Lynette Austin said to me one time, she said, "We are Indian people. We've always been Indian people, and like Indian people, we intermarry with blacks, whites, and other tribal peoples, and I won't deny any of it." So they have this attitude, which is really a traditional Native attitude, all my relations. All my relations. I don't deny any part of me. Okay? And so, I get along very well with those folks. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here, when we talk about cards, now, what folk will do in Virginia and some other southern states, like, it's prevalent in Virginia, North Carolina, and in somewhat South Carolina. You won't find this out west as much. Like, when you go to a powwow, you're dressed in your powwow regalia, and, you come into the dance circle with everybody else. No one questions your Indianness. This is out west. You come to Virginia, North Carolina, with some of these tribes, they will card you. In other words, they want to see your tribal card because you look just a bit too black to them. So then they want to see your tribal card, and if you don't produce that tribal card, then they will put you out of the circle. This is what happened with the Chickahominy in 1910 when they escorted Shonda Buchanan out of the circle.
Yeah.
Now here's the interesting
Back
thing.
in 1910?
2010? Was that 2010?
Did I say 1910?
Yes, you did.
I wasn't even born
Coming
in
to the contemporary.
2010. Now here's the other side of that. If you go further up north, okay, into the New England area, then if you look too white, you might get carded there.
That's crazy.
So a friend of mine who is Shinnecock, the Shinnecock, they say that they want you to be prepared. They don't say that that a tribal card is a must. They want you to present a card if they ask you. So I asked a friend of mine who is Shinnecock, I said, so if I come, am I going to be carded? He said, oh, no, not you. He said, you'll be fine. He said, just bring your regalia. He said they won't think twice about letting you in. Now I'm, brown skin, long locks, and he said, no, you'll be fine. But if I were to come to Virginia to powwow with some of these folks, most of the tribes would not let me in because they would take one look at me, and they would want to card me. Don't have a card. Wouldn't walk around with one. That's just me. Okay. So again, this is the type of politics that's played out when you are someone of African American and Native American ancestry and your African American predominates.
Okay, so let me ask you, Arica.
And then, of course, let me just say this real quick also, Barbara, is that when people say to me, well, it's really interesting, because you don't look Indian. And I say to them, you watch too much Turner Classic TV.
In terms of what an Indian looks like.
Exactly.
So we've got about 3 minutes left, so I need you to kind of condense this. But I know the hour flies by very quickly. So where do we go? Vincent mentioned very early on in the show, and I want both of you to answer this, where he said, we all came to the same party. How do we come back together? What do we need to do?
We're doing it right now.
Let me get Erica's response first, and then I'll get yours, Vincent.
Sure.
You know what? One of the in the book That the Blood Stay Pure, the saving grace of that book is chapter 7, the Nottoway. And what we need to do is, like the Nottoway have done, we need to decolonize our minds. We need to reject these notions, this rhetoric of blood, this notion of identity based on blood, this notion of the one-drop rule, black contamination, racial purity, the whole 9 yards. We need to reject that. And we need to embrace other ways of identity and other ways of knowing.
Okay.
And this is what I was talking about earlier, that attitude of all of my relations. Because what this has been one big campaign of divide, conquer, and rule.
Okay,
Crazy.
Arica, and with that, I'm going to have to let you go. Arica Coleman, she's the author of That the Blood Stay Pure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
and
you so much.
You take care now. And Vincent,
right.
you got the final
Awesome.
word. We got about 30 seconds.
Well, I was just going to say we're doing it right now, and I want to just reiterate to one thing where she said the victors of war, it's now by the victors of social media. We're coming back. So
You've got some events coming up,
I have
don't
an event,
you?
Native American Heritage Month celebration at Pembroke Mall in Virginia Beach, the second Saturday, November 9th, from 12 to 4 p.m. Would love to have folks come. Live hawks, dancers, singers, drummers, come on down.
Fantastic.
And I don't care what color you are. We're going to all shake hands. We're all going to put our arm to arm together and have a great time together.
I appreciate that. Vincent, thank you so much. Vincent
Awesome.
Schilling.
Thanks for having
He
me.
is the talk show host of the Native Trailblazers Radio Show.
Yeah.
And we will be right back.
Hello, this is Spike Lee. What's happening? And you listen to Another View, 89.5 FM on WHRV.
Interesting discussion today, something totally different that we really haven't focused on here on Another View, so I appreciate that conversation. And on behalf of the staff of Another View, I'd like to say a very sincere thank you to all of our listeners for joining us every Friday and sending us your comments and your feedback. And a very special thank you to all of you who have made your pledge of support to our show. It's your contributions that keep Another View on the air. So if you enjoy this show, won't you give us a call right now at 889-9476 and make your pledge, or go to WHRV.org and point, click, and contribute. Now, I know that this is a real tough time for a lot of people with the government being shut down earlier, and many of you are just getting back to work. So if you cannot make a pledge, we certainly understand, and you can support us just by listening and by calling in. But if you are in a position to give your support, please do so. Just reach down deep and give a little extra to cover those who would give but cannot. Join our Another View and our WHRV family. I'm a member. Are you a member? We sure would love to have you join us. And you know what? I understand that we actually made our goal of the $1,000 and actually went over that goal. We were at $2,708 the last time. So thank you to our listeners. That's our show for this week. But before we go, a very happy birthday to 3 of our favorite Another View fans. My beautiful daughter, Tiffany Ham, Ms. Mia Bird, and Ms. Diane Montgomery. Happy birthday, ladies. We really appreciate all of you. Our theme music was composed and produced by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our producer. Our audio engineer is Victor Bowen, and Alexandra Pumphrey answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to call in now and make your pledge, and I'll see you on the radio next Friday at noon for Another View.